Hello, I'm Krista McAllister, and welcome to Serious Leadership. Whether you are growing your business, growing your career, or quite possibly both, thank you for listening. Today, I am excited to welcome Kim Sentovich. And Kim, you've had such a diverse exposure and experience to a range of companies. You've worked with private equity backed, venture backed, public companies, private companies, and you've done it from the perspective of a board member, CEO, and senior leadership. I've really been looking forward to our discussion and getting your perspective on some of our discussion today.
Great. No, I'm really happy to be here.
It's interesting, some of the commonalities and themes that as we talk to senior leadership and business owners, I speak with a lot of companies who are at varying parts of their growth curve. One of the common themes, regardless of size, ownership structure, industry, is they're all trying to figure out how do we get alignment between our growth strategy, our operational structure, and the people and culture throughout our organization. And I'm wondering, with your range of experience and all the companies you've worked with, why is this such a battle getting those aligned?
I think what I've seen is oftentimes people don't really haven't spent the time to prioritize. They're kind of like, I want to grow, but they haven't really sat down and said, like, exactly what are the areas that I need to grow in? What exactly is my strategy and the tactical pieces of it? And what are the problems and the questions that I need to solve in order to do this growth? And I think if people back up a little bit and they start asking, those questions, and that's usually why when I go into a new business, whether it's, a new job or even just a company that I'm consulting with, one of the first things I ask everybody in the company, I'll do one-on-ones or like I've done where I've done a survey, is I'm like, tell me two or three things that you're going to be like, oh my gosh, wait till she finds out about this. She's going to be like, ooh, this really is crazy or needs to be fixed. And then tell me two or three things that are really core to who the business is. Like, don't mess with these things. This is part of our culture. This is part of who we are, and it doesn't need to be changing. And when you do that, you start to see some common themes about who the business is, what's important to the business, what's important to the people that work there. And then at the same time, you start to see themes about what are the problems that they really need to solve? What are the things that are top of mind for people that potentially need to be prioritized or at least need to be addressed? And I think then you can start to put together sort of that game plan that starts to say, what is the strategy? What's the structure that we need? But when people start trying to answer those questions before they really know what the problems are or what the strategy is, I think things just get lost. And then there's a lot of change because as you start to sort it out, then you keep changing things and people are just uncomfortable with change. And so I think that then creates another spin.
And you can see how complex it gets
Yes.
from the inside. So let's unpack a few of those items there, because you said, I walk in and I ask them, what do they need to be fixed? And my immediate thing is, well, if they know what needs to be fixed, why haven't they fixed it already? Like, that's why you're coming in to tell them what needs to be fixed. We're like, no, I just ask them. They tell me.
It's amazing. I think a lot of times people get caught in the word like I can't or we can't because there's some block that's there that they've either tried or that they've missed each other. Groups of people have missed each other, and that would, or different groups are solving different parts of the problem, but they're not working on solving it together. And that's where I think they do know what it is. There's nothing magical that you're going to find out that like people that are doing the business day in and day out don't already know. They just haven't figured out how to prioritize and then work together on the execution part. And I know you love stories, and I think one of the stories that I told you about this was when I first went to Gymboree. And I did this exercise with all the district managers, and I was like, I'm new, I know there's a lot of things that we need to work on. I'm going to be, now I'm the leader for your stores. And one of the big things that came out was we need to be able to email our stores. And I was like, you guys don't have email? Like, this is 2016. Like, everybody, like email boxes, everybody's got stuff. And they're like, nope, we have old back office computers that have an old version of Internet Explorer that can't be updated. And we can't fix the computers because it's too expensive. And so therefore we can't have email. And I was like, well, there's got to be other ways to get email. And IT was like, no, we can't update the computers. So we fax things to everybody. And I was like,
2016.
yeah, it's like we send faxes or we leave a voicemail. I was like, voicemail? Like, really? Like, I don't even know if I have voicemail at my house anymore. So, we started really looking at, well, how do we get email? This is like malls. Like, we should be able to get, like, a line in, and we should be able to, like, and what if we didn't run it on the back office system? Like, what if we had another device there that we ran it on? Like, we can't update that system because it's attached to another system. And so then it was like a chain. But I'm like, what if we went outside of that and we looked at, other devices that we could have? I mean, should we get the stores like an iPad? And that's what we ended up doing, was we ended up putting in iPads in the stores and then loading the email onto the iPads along with some dashboards so that they could see sort of like what their sales were and things. And then we were able to send them PDFs that they could then look at, like what the layouts for the stores were supposed to be, because we were overnighting those because they couldn't they couldn't get they couldn't look at
Right.
them in an email. So now we had the ability to do all that. And what I realized as we got into solving the problem was they were caught up in, for IT was like, well, if we put, internet in there, it has to be able to run a register. It was like, well, why are we solving that problem? Like, we're not planning on running registers, but what if we need to in the future? But let's solve the problem that we're solving right now and execute that, not try to solve every problem, even ones we don't even have yet. So by the time we got through all of those, it was like we could put an iPad in that can run on cellular to start with until we have the ability
Mhm.
to pull the line and then have Wi-Fi. And we can encrypt it with VPN. The and it we everyone's like, well, how are we going to pay for it? Like, that's the next big problem to solve. And I was like, but we're eliminating a fax machine, we're eliminating a second line from the store, and we spent $600,000 a year on paper. And so by the time you said, like, we're going to take those things out, which nobody really wanted to do anyways, nobody wanted all this paper and come in and it was like exploding all over the floor, and we're going to give the stores an iPad. And once you started really peeling away the onions and said, our only goal is we're going to figure out how to get the stores email. We're not going to worry about registers. We're not going to worry about, like, updating, the POS system right now. We're just going to worry about how do we get email to this group of, 7 to 12 employees that are in this store in 1,400 stores. And then what things can we take out in order to save money? And when we did that, we were able to, in less than 4 months, be able to get all the stores up and running on email. But that to me was, they all knew what the problem was. People were struggling with how to figure out how to remove obstacles, some of them mental, and then some of them just thinking through the problem differently to make sure we weren't over solving the problem.
I can picture a group of individuals in a meeting with IT trying to figure out how do we update our computer system, and they're stuck on how do we update the computer system, asking, well, but why are we trying to update the computer system? Well, because we're trying to get email. Okay, then why are we solving for updating? We're now trying to solve for that, and then that caused another problem, and then we solve for that, and then we cause it, and you end up down that proverbial squirrel hole
Yep.
chasing a purple rabbit
Yep.
when all you really needed to do was find a place to sit in the sun, or you needed to get out of the sun. You didn't need to go down that squirrel.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I
and
love it. I've
so
known you
many
for
times where that happens, you're in a business and you're like,
years.
well, and people are solving, they're like, well, they'll never do that. It's like, well, did you ask them? Like, have you really sat down to make sure you understand what the other area's problem is? And if they said no, were they really saying no to what you were trying to do? Or were they saying no to something that they're worried is going to happen? or worried might not be able to happen. So that's why I think it's really getting people to be curious about digging deeper into the problem to figure it out and asking lots of questions, being open to having discussions, and then really honing in on what problem are you solving and then prioritizing those problems and solving them. Because we could have said, yep, email is really important, but we didn't spend the extra time to, well, what are other ways that you can get email? Like, how can we get email in a different way? And then, even when we got to the iPad, people were like, well, we need to make sure that like later, if we want to I was like, why are we solving for the register yet? Like, we we don't need to solve it to be a register yet.
Oh, and knowing you the way I can picture you in a mall, in a Gymboree, walking out of Gymboree, walking down to the nearest cellular store. Here's my credit card. Give me an iPad. I want it working right now. Walking over and going, email. Look at this. And sometimes you do need to, let's just do this once and let's see if it works and proof of concept, which could be
Yep,
done in all of 15 minutes. Although walking into a cellular store is never 15 minutes, but hypothetically 15 minutes,
yep.
we can do that. And how satisfying was it when they went and unplugged that fax machine?
Oh, the stores were because then you built credibility that you could solve problems. And then other people were jumping in, solving other problems that we had. But now they were thinking about how to solve those problems in entirely different ways. Like it just opened doors where they were like, oh, wait, these things over here that we had mentally put as off limits really aren't off limits. We just have to figure out how to solve it and then make sure we're digging in and doing the right financial disciplines. But like, it's more open than we thought. Because I really think, I always tell people when we're solving something, people start with, I can't. And I'm like, we don't do I can't yet. I go, I have more confidence in you than you do that we can solve this problem. People know how to solve problems. And if they're experts in a specific area, I'm positive they know how to solve them. They just mentally need to remove some of the obstacles or places where people have told them no before, or even things that used to be a no, but now are actually possible. I mean, I remember when I was at Home Depot and, blinds were, I had blinds and it was like, everyone was like, we can cut blinds in store. And we were doing it with aluminum and other stuff. And then we rolled out like these they were like plastic wood blinds and we were cutting them in store. And at first they weren't really that successful. But then as people got more into the regular wood, those became more popular. And it was like, sometimes things are there early and sometimes they're there late. So it's like, you have to keep thinking about it and going back to some ideas because sometimes it's the second time that they actually work.
So never throw away a bad idea because it might be good again. It might be good
Yes,
at one
might be
point.
good again.
That's what we
Sometimes it's just a bad idea, which is okay, but don't totally eliminate it. Sometimes you got to bring them back out and re-examine them.
And you mentioned at the beginning the sometimes companies struggle with fixing it. You've got that mindset, but also it's that prioritization. And we talked about how the company's got to grow. We need to grow operationally sound. We need to make improvements, and we get stuck in this improve cycle. And we're always looking, and we end up with, I say this a lot, you got 10 different improvement initiatives to support that strategy. And because everyone said, here's all the things that are broken, here's all the problems, we have 10. But in reality, if you're in a growth mode, your resources are going towards growth, not
Yep.
necessarily process improvement. And you're trying to work on 10 things and you really only have the resources to do one or two of them well. How are you helping them dwindle down that? How are we selecting and prioritizing so that we don't feel like we've got split personalities throughout our organization? We're not ending up with that passing over and we miss the high five constantly.
Yep. Yep. No, I think there's a couple things. One is when I start looking at prioritization, there's what I call kind of the low hanging fruit. And I think sometimes you have to pick one or two that might not be the most biggest impact on the organization from like true process improvement, but they mentally and emotionally mean a lot to the people that are there. And so those things, sometimes being able to knock one of those out gives you the credibility and gives the organization and the team the momentum to be able to move forward to some of the bigger ones that will be harder. And so
Hmm.
I do think sometimes you have to look at, is this, even though it's small, is it just going to mean so much that people are going to be like, oh, okay, this, I believe in what we're doing, and so I'm willing to be there for the hard things. And I remember there was a company I was doing some work with, and they were doing markdowns for stores. And the just getting the list organized differently so that they didn't have to go like find all the sizes all over the store, and having it ordered so it was like, here's the product, and then here's all the different sizes of it, organized, color and then size. And it was like, because before it was just, and they were like, everyone's like, well, it's just a random list, we can't do anything about it. And people were like, well, if we could just have a picture and it was just ordered differently. I was like, all right. I mean, it wasn't one of those things that was like markdowns are going to happen like, 18 times faster. They were going to happen faster, but it wasn't going to be, revolutionary. But it was going to make a lot of people happier because the stores were really frustrated about it. Emotionally, people were really invested in this answer. And we did. We made it pull up a picture because they have pictures of all the products on the website. So we were able
Hmm.
to leverage assets that they already had and then use Excel to put the picture there and resort everything and send the list to the stores in the order that they wanted it. It wasn't like you would look at it and be like, wow, this isn't like amazing process improvement, but it made the stores really happy. And then when we were trying to do more difficult things, they were on board because they remembered that you had done something that they had wanted done first. And I think that's where you have to pick some of those. And then you have to look at like, what are some of the biggest things that need building blocks that need to happen in order to get to the others, and break off one, maybe two of those and go after them big. Like the email, that was a harder one. Like we really had to dig in to do that one. Um, but we weren't trying to do email and like fix the POS system and reorganize the back rooms. And, like there was a lot of other ones we could have done, but we picked that one and said, this is going to be, super impactful overall. And then once we get this done, then we can see, does it solve some of these other problems that we might have? And like, then what comes next?
That's amazing that you can use that even from a collaboration, because a lot of companies are having issues with silos if you work from home. We're just not used to collaborating and talking with each other. Like we've gone back to a lot of the old silo thinking. And sometimes you don't need to address that one head on. You can say, let's find a problem that we
Yep.
can all rage against. We can all
Yeah.
agree
Because it
this
involves
is
more than
not
one area.
working. And let's throw it out there and see how, and just kind of help them remember, how do we collaborate and how do we solve problems together? Because when you're rallied around a common cause, it's a little easier to see each other's points of view. When you're solving for those, sometimes you're solving for something over here that's going to impact over there, and we forget to talk to the individuals it's impacting. How do you help walk them through and remember there's an entire organization, and there's Sally over in accounting, and there's Joe over in purchasing. Have we talked to Sally and Joe?
Yeah, no, and this is why once you sort of start seeing what the bigger buckets are, and it's one of the reasons why, I've talked about retail and, consumer products, but, I do a lot of work with companies that are across all kinds of spectrums now, because the problem of solving problems is the same. And I actually think that sometimes it's even more helpful when I have less knowledge
Mm-hmm.
ingrown, because then I'm asking the questions and digging out and asking the people, but I have no preconceived notions about how the problem should be solved or which ones are the most important. So you really help to get the team to think about how the problem, what the problems are, what the possible solutions are. And I think it's more empowering for the team that's going to be left, not only solving it, but also the team that's going to be continuing to run those processes or the new things that come in place. They have to believe in it, not just some person that comes in and says, I took this from the last 3 companies I was at and said, do this. It's like, it's more personalized to them. But I think part of that then means that when you identify that, I always look at it as like, what's the recommendation? Then you go in like, who needs to be informed about this? Like, what areas is it gonna, actually impact? And let's make sure all those people are informed. And then it's like, who's gonna be impacted? So there's something that's going to change about their job. And so therefore they actually might need new training, they might need new people, they might need skills, they might, something new might actually come to them that
Mhm.
never came to them before. So like, because there's a difference between being informed and being impacted. And I'm like, you really have to think about those to make sure that you get all the stakeholders. And then you've got, people that should have more input into the final solution because they've got knowledge about the area and it's usually cross-functional. So that's where, getting people to work together. And then you've got to have somebody that actually makes the decision because the other place this stuff gets caught up is you go through all that. Everybody's aligned, everybody agrees what needs to happen, and then nobody makes a decision because nobody's really clear. That's one of the complexities of very cross-functional organizations and
Mhm.
cross-functional problem solving is that at some point somebody has to make a decision. And often I find companies aren't clear about who is making which decision because it can't all be the top. Like it can't be the CEO makes every decision. Sometimes it's got to be a subject matter expert or somebody that's the most impacted or is got the closest relationship with the customer, like depending on what the issue is. And if you aren't clear, then when you get all these people in a room and you start making the decision and people leave, even if you said this is the decision we're making, then there becomes all the back channel stuff. Well,
Uh,
I go and talk to this person because like I might get them to undo the thing that we just decided in the meeting to do. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, but we all decided. It's like, yeah, but I know that so and so didn't really agree with that. And it's like, okay, but is it their decision? I mean, everybody has, there's always that saying you have to get on board and like when we leave the room, we're all together, but not every decision is going to be consensus. And at some point, somebody has to make the decision, and then everybody does have to get on board, and then you leave and go. But you have to be clear about who's making it. Because I find even a company I'm working with right now, it's like no one's clear whose decision it is. They're all hoping to convince this person. So they keep reopening the decision and saying, well, look, this is a good way to do it. And here's why again. And he's like, well, I already made that decision. I don't know why people keep coming and asking me to make the decision again. And it's like, I don't think you're actually the decision maker. I think they just want you to believe in it. And they're trying to be really nice about getting you there
on board with
and
it.
on board with it. But the reality is you think you made the decision, but they really know that they're the decision maker. They just haven't told you. And that creates some of the dysfunction I think you see in organizations.
Flashbacks. The dysfunction that can go on there. Having everything out in the open, and you mentioned clarity, and I wrote down inform who's impacted and what input do we need. And we talked about the decision maker. Like, how simple would this process be if it's decided at the beginning? We know here's the decision maker, and the decision maker has told us what their decision process is, what criteria they need, what do we need to, we might be going through all this work and not providing the information that the actual decision maker needs. And we're doing all the back channel when we don't need to do all that.
Yep.
Let's just talk about it up front and understand, because what I've seen a lot of the decision makers, they're not clear on how they make a decision. And it
Sometimes they're not
may
even clear they're the decision maker.
and it's different each time. It's like, well, I made the decision. Wait a minute, what you did this time is different than how you did it last time. I am confused, and getting clarity on how do we make decisions in the company and having that company wide.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of times people think the person with the, the highest title is the person that makes the decision. It's like, that's not always the right person to make the decision. They can be part of the inform and the
Mhm.
input, but they might not actually be the right person to make the actual decision. And so that's why I'm always like being clear about who, choosing like who's going to manufacture a product. Okay, like when I was the CEO of Ratio, it's like, who's going to manufacture the product? I wanted to be at the meeting. I wanted to understand like how we'd gone about the process, was all the input and inform and, did the engineers have a say, like, and meet the people. But at the end of the day, it wasn't my decision to make. There was a whole group of supply chain folks and people that were going to be working day in and day out with the manufacturer. The head of that group needed to make the decision, and they needed to be comfortable that they had gotten all the input and everything, and they needed to be comfortable knowing that we were going to trust the decision that they made. But he knew that he was in charge of the decision, and it wasn't going to, keep spinning,
Mhm.
even if somebody else liked this person better. And that's why I think it's really clear. And oftentimes people just default to, well, it's the most senior person. No, the most senior person may not always be the right person to make the decision.
So get clarity at the beginning.
Clarity at the beginning, because if it's not, then the process kind of falls apart because not everybody is sure who they need to get their input and
Mhm.
inform and everybody together.
And especially in the environment and how quickly things can change and evolve, what was true yesterday may not be true today. So
Yep.
each time we should be doing that check in and not just assuming, well, it was the same. This is how we did it 6 months ago. This is how we're going to do it today.
I actually think it's more important to be doing that now and keeping that trust and communication going. The world changes so much faster now. Decisions that you were making, you really have to keep thinking about and not changing because you don't want to be the people that are changing all the time, but just continually evaluating, is there tweaks that we need to make, are there new people that need to be informed,
Mhm.
are there new questions we need to ask. I mean, just look at the environment right now with trying to decide where am I going to manufacture a product, like we were talking about, like
Mhm.
tariffs, like, okay, well, I was going to be in Vietnam because I moved out of China. Okay, well, no, they have 46%. Well, should I be in Mexico? Okay, no, do I need to have near shore and far shore? I mean, these problems that even were simple, or not simple, they were never simple, but they were different sets of questions you asked yourself even 6 months ago than you would ask yourself now, and nobody knows what 6 months later is gonna be, so you can't say like, "Oh, I'm gonna make the decision and it's gonna be absolutely the right one for the next 5 years." Those days don't exist anymore.
And you mentioned the sometimes it's not about changing. And at the beginning, you had talked about, look, I asked them what are the things that they want to fix, what are the things they know are broken, but also what are the things that we should keep, that we shouldn't touch? And some people will call those sacred cows. Some people will say, what about what got us there won't get you there? There's all of these reasons. But from some of the best CEOs and especially turnaround CEOs, they say, you got to respect the legacy. I know you use that word respect a lot
Yep.
as you talk about it. How do you reconcile that? What do we need to evolve to, and what do we need to hold on to?
I think, that's why I always ask people, because you get an idea then of what's important to them. So there was
Mhm.
a company that I was working with, and I you know, they made a product, like a thermostat, and they were being pushed to like get into different channels and look at it differently. And as you really got to know them, and you ask them like, well, what are the things that are important, it was like quality, like the quality of the product. Like, our product doesn't break, we're very good engineers and technology, how we put the product together, and it's at a value. Like, this is part of who we are. So it was like, okay, no matter what they were doing, whatever channel they went into or anything else, it was like they, if you were like, hey, we're going to take a bunch of stuff out of it and we're going to like try to make it cheaper by, taking out some of the inner workings, it was like,
Mhm.
that's not going to work with this group. Like they, they're so believe in making a quality. Now, can you make a quality product for less money? Yes, that's called value. But making something cheap just to make it cheap, that wasn't the way this group was going to work. It was too important to how they thought. So you had to approach it that if you were going to take cost out of something, it was how do we take cost out of something without hurting the quality of the product? And if you didn't talk that way, because I also believe words matter, if you
Mhm.
didn't talk that way and you weren't clear about that that was the goal, you weren't going to get any alignment on being able to make any changes at all. Because once you did that, they were like, "Oh, you want to make something that's high quality but for less money? Okay, let me this we might be over engineering this over here. So if we did this, it'll still work really well and it'll still be high quality, but it won't be as expensive." And it's just total different way of approaching it, knowing that you knew what was important to that group.
It's interesting. You talk about uh, the different stakeholders involved in engineering, and well, we may have over engineered it because that's what we love to do, the highest quality. And one stakeholder that we haven't talked about much is, especially when solving problems, is that customer.
Yep.
Sometimes we get siloed as a company solving our problems.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And you
Like,
worked with so
whose
many.
problem are you solving? I always tell people, if you have a
Yes.
product, you should be pretty clear about who the customer is and sort of what problem you're solving for them. Because again, if you're not, for the same reason it's hard to solve a problem inside a business, you're going to have a tough time explaining to a customer why they need to buy the product that you have. And that's like not even just like physical products, but if you're providing a solution,
Mhm.
whether it's a software solution or a service solution, it's got to be solving a pain point or a problem for the customer so that they understand I need this and here's why. Because if it's just like, I'm was like trying to think of is that there's so many where like someone's been like, well, we need to like solve this problem. It's like, but is that your problem or is that the customer's problem? Because if it's not, like, it's not going to matter to them that you solved this problem. It might be cool, but it's not something that's going to really
Mhm.
discuss with them, and you're not going to sell more product. Because that's the other thing. If you're in a growth mode, the reality is some of these problems that need solving, and we were talking about prioritizing, they're problems that are problems for the company, but they're not necessarily ones that are customer facing.
Mhm.
And therefore, you may solve them. They might save you money, they might not, but they might not create any more revenue. And so there's times in your growth cycle where you're like, this is a good problem and we do need to solve it, but we also need revenue and we need to be growing revenue. And this isn't going to grow any revenue. It's just going to make us feel better because it solves a problem we have. So right now we need to put that one down here and we need to solve some problems that actually grow revenue and are customer facing. So I think that's another place where you sort of go down through when you're looking at like, okay, how do I pick out those one or two? What phase is the company in? If you're a more established company and you're already slow growing, then you're probably looking at cost out type thing, problems that you're
Mhm.
solving. How do I make myself more efficient? How do I take some cost out so that I can continue to put more money back to the bottom line so that I can grow my profitability so I can either sell the company or I can invest in something new or whatever. But if you're a more of a startup, like a venture company, you're like, I need to grow. Like, I can sort out some of the process stuff later, but if I'm not growing, then I can't show that this business idea can take off. And I won't be able to get the next group of people to invest, or I won't be able to get the next person to buy and help me to take it further. So then you're prioritizing based on, is this a revenue growing thing that I'm trying to solve for,
Mhm.
or is this a cost out thing? And what stage is the company at?
We talked about that tug of war at the beginning between our growth strategy, our operational efficiencies, our people, our culture, our employee engagement, and
Yep.
that constant tug of war. And that's where I see at the intersection is who are we solving the problems for? If we are in growth mode, there's a lot of frustration with the individuals inside the organization of we need to be solving problems for our customer, but we're engrossed in these problems and we want to solve our operational efficiencies. And you and I both know what that how that story ends
Yep.
when you are in growth mode and you've got to constantly be solving for the customer and you're trying to solve for your operational inefficiencies.
Well,
Those
that's
two
like the pick sometimes picking one of those operational efficiency ones that you know is really meaningful to people so that you can get them on board for the other one. That's why I said it's not, hey, these are the top 5 that will, make us more money, or these are the top 5 that will grow their business. It's a little bit of a mix. And that's why you have to understand the people aspect of it. Because sometimes some of those ones they might be just that right pain point that gets the credibility and the trust for the management team to be able to tackle this bigger one for the revenue growth. And that's why I said it's not cookie cutter. And that's why I always do this like ask the 3 problems or 3, 4. I'm like, if you can't think of 3, like give me 2. Um, and then what are the things over here that are important? Because you do get a feel for sort of like the culture and the people aspect. And you need that in order to be able to do any of this.
I love it. Stepping back, who are we solving this problem for? And what are we expecting? So I appreciate that we can't, in that your prioritization, if we're in growth mode, we are going to prioritize solving for the customer, but we can get some small wins internally and take away some friction that might keep us from solving for that customer versus I love it, the cost out, those operational efficiencies. Okay, I doubled my growth and I cut my profit in half. What's going on?
Yeah, what's going on? There
Okay, we see that
are some
story.
financial realities that also need to happen. Yeah.
Welcome to high growth. I just as kind of a parting thought, I would like to know what's your piece of advice as companies are struggling with. I know what problems I need to fix. I just don't know where to start. I don't know which ones to fix first. I'm just mired in I've got more problems than I have solutions right now. What's your piece of advice for what's that first step? Where should they go to first?
I think it's really sitting down to decide, are you sure all of these things, when you look at all of them, one, are they really problems? And what are you actually trying to solve for? Like, get to the root cause of what you're trying to solve for. Because oftentimes people like the email example. It was like, we want to have email, but what I realized when you really started asking questions, people were solving a whole bunch of other little problems in there that were getting in the way. And as soon as you stripped out, it was like, stop solving all these other problems. We're just solving email. Just email. I told you, if I said you had to have email in 30 days, what would you do? What obstacles would you take out of the way? What things would you maybe like not do in order to do that? Because if you picked the right problem,
Mhm.
you won't get into this like over solving little side problems, extra things. One person I worked with called them barnacles on the boat. Like that's the problem is you got the boat, everybody knows where it's going, you're aligned, and then everybody's like putting barnacles on, and you're like, whoa, 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 hang on a second, wait, stay.
Slowing us down. I love it.
So
I
make
will.
sure you're not putting barnacles on your boat and that you are staying the course and aligning because people will inherently just want to come up with, well, we didn't think about this. We didn't think, do we need to? Is that even important right now?
You say that, and I think of the term overcorrecting. It's like, yes, we need to go to the right, but we don't need to turn the steering wheel like that.
Right.
We're going to end up just spinning out, and we end up in that constant. We can't, but then what if, and then you don't ever actually solve for that original. I can
Well, and I often
love
tell
it.
people it's like sometimes when you're coming up with stuff, I'm like, let's do it in, I call it the bubble gum and toothpick wave to start with. Because if you try to build it too perfectly the first time and there's so many unknowns that you might still have, you don't have it, you sort of have built it, and then when something doesn't quite work, you're trying to shove it in to make it work because you spent so much time building it that way. So I'm like, sometimes it's good to like kind of put it together. It might be more loosely done. That's why we did the iPads with cellular to start with. I was like, okay, we need to have email, but before we start like, putting in lines and doing all kinds of other stuff, like the faster way is to just get the like what if the iPad's not strong enough or big enough or have enough memory? Like we need to make sure that like what we're doing before we like figure out all the pieces and go down there, the thing we're going to do is going to work. We eventually then we got like the lines drawn and we put the routers in and everything else, but it was after we were already finding tons of ways to use it. And we were like, oh my gosh, like we can do this now. We can do this now. We can do this now. Maybe we need two, so I think that's the other thing is you don't have to solve it perfectly in the first go round because you will find that there's things you want to do slightly different.
I love that saying. If you're not embarrassed by your first iteration, you didn't get it done fast enough.
Yes. Because sometimes speed is better than perfect.
It's also you and I are a little fast paced, as you can
I know,
tell.
and I like speed. So I'm like, and it doesn't mean being reckless. Like people sometimes like that, that, ooh. And I'm like, no, that's why it's called bubblegum and toothpicks. It's like it still works. It's just not gonna stay there forever. You're gonna have to shore it up later.
You do some iterations to it. I love it. Kim, thank you so much for your perspective and your advice. It's fun having some of those same experiences way back in the
Yep.
depot days and thinking through all of things, because there was a lot of respect and a lot of legacy there and what made that organization great. And we've lived through a lot of that evolution, that change. And I think they're just one of those testaments to what got you there. Keep some of it. It doesn't need to all respect that.
Nope.
And it's fun to see some of those individuals we worked with way back when at the store level are now leading the
Yes. No, it's so
organization.
exciting because those are key fundamental things that you get taught, and then that you realize that they apply to like all kinds of businesses, and it's the same, sort of basic tenets.
Well, I thank you and I appreciate all that you do to help organizations. I'm going to say unplug that proverbial fax machine. To go find the fax machine in your organization, unplug it. There's got to be a better way. Kim, thank you so much for your insights and your advice. And until next time.